Morning, everybody. And last when we left off, we were talking about how different European nations were getting involved in the New World. Okay, and we talked about how England and Spain they had a battle, a naval battle. Where did that naval battle take place? The English Channel. And this particular naval battle is a watershed moment in history, or it's a red letter day. That's the kind of terminology we use in history for saying it's really important, and it's important for the future of America, even though America didn't even exist yet. So, some reasons for that is because it made England a dominant force on the oceans. They became master of the ocean, and really spearheaded their efforts to now they're able to go and establish new places in the New World. So now that they have the ability to do it, why go? Why do they even want to go to start with? What are some push factors for people wanting to go to the New World? Can you guys guess any? You just take a wild guess. Say it one more time.
Like poverty and
Definitely, there's a lot of, without a doubt, and that is probably one of my answers here. What about England itself? Who can geographically tell me about England? You guys have heard of England. Can you tell me anything about its geography? It's small compared to what? The United America? Let's compare America to England. What do you think? America is significantly larger. How old is England? How old is England? You can just say really old. And that really old would be right. Older than America? Yeah. You think all the land in England had already been taken, accounted for, owned? Yeah, only for about 1,000 years. Okay? So there's no real opportunity to be a landowner if you're not already one. But is there a lot of people in England? Yeah. So one reason, overpopulated. A lot of people. England's population rose from some 3 million people in 1550 to 4 million people just 50 years later. That's a significant increase in just one lifetime. So, it's no accident that people who are living in England were some of the first immigrants to America, especially, like Nikki said earlier, people that were poor. Economic depression was another major reason for people to go from England to the New World. Particularly like sheep farmers in the woolen trade. Farmers were unemployed and they drifted about England. Another push factor we alluded to earlier. Who can say this word? It's up there, right? Hello? Primogeniture. Very good. Primogeniture. Thank you, Noel. Now, the million-dollar question. Who can tell me what it is? Primogeniture is the idea and decree and custom that only the eldest sons could inherit estates. Only eldest sons were eligible to inherit estates. How is primogeniture a reason to go to the New World? Let's say you're the third born son. How much you getting? Nothing. Whatever older brother wants to give. And if older brother's not the most generous type, you may not get anything. So, how is going to the New World going to solve these problems? How's it going to solve overpopulation? Okay, there are very, 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 very few people living in America. And you can just go there and you have a chance to make something of yourself. Can you even have your own land? How much? As much as you want, really. Really, as much as you want. I mean, as long as you can defend it from the people that are already there, you can have it. All right? That was the idea amongst the Europeans at the time. Economic depression. How is fleeing from Europe going to help solve that? You have an opportunity. Hey, if I go from living in a gutter in London to I can get on a boat and go across the ocean and have 500 acres of land to myself to try to farm and make something of my life and my family. Does that seem like a pretty, is that an opportunity? Yeah, because in England and Europe for thousands of years, wealth has been tied to what? Land ownership. So you could go from being homeless and living in a gutter to owning hundreds of acres of land. And the only thing that separated you is the Atlantic Ocean. It's a pretty good opportunity, okay? Especially when land ownership is tied to wealth. Well, you would be one of the largest landowners in Europe if you had 500 acres of land. You can just go and they're basically giving it away for free in the New World. Primogeniture. How's this going to help? It's very similar to this one. You just go. You go and it belongs to you. It doesn't belong to your brother anymore. It's yours. So there's a lot of reasons for why English people wanted to go to the New World. Now, how are they going to get there? Well, the British think of they invent something that's pretty important. And it's called the Virginia Company of London. You ever heard of it? The Virginia Company of London is a joint stock company. It is a joint stock company. Do you guys know what the joint stock company is? That's right. That's right. It is the forerunner to a modern corporation. What makes a corporation different than just a company? Yeah, lots of people are owners in it. For example, can I be an owner of Walmart or Apple? Yes, I can. How? Invest by buying stocks. Guess what joint stock companies did? Sold stocks. That's right. Very good. Now, if I am an investor, how am I going to make money on going to the New World by investing in it? How is this going to work? What is its purpose? Okay. Wealthy people will say, I will invest some money into this venture. So I'm going to give you $1,000. All right? And if hundreds of people give thousands of dollars, then that creates a large pool of money, right? And so now they can buy a boat, they can pay a captain, they can buy supplies, and they can put people on the boat. And those people, what are they going to do? They're going to go to the New World. And eventually they're going to return. What are they going to return with? Could be maybe gold. What else? Anything of value. Natural resources of some kind. And when they return with those things, who gets the profit? The investors, the people who put the money up front. If they do find boatloads of gold, what happens with the investors? What happens? The investors get what? They get a large return on their investment. What happens if they go over there and the ship sinks on the way? You've lost your investment. It's just like, hey, I'm going to invest in a restaurant in Beckley. Like, Chloe's going to open a restaurant. She's going to open up a Red Lobster because everybody loves Red Lobster, right? And so Chloe says, Mr. Moore, I want to invest in Red Lobster. Would you like to be an investor? And so I say, sure, Chloe, here's Here's $2 million. Now Chloe can go buy the land and buy the license and buy the food and hire people and get insurance and buy all the stuff. She's ready for business. And she opens it up and she does great. Everybody's going there. It's packed every night. Everybody's loving the seafood. And so Chloe's going to pay me back thousands of dollars a month until she pays me not only back my $2 million, but everything above that. Okay, she'll pay me back forever because I invested in her company. That's good. That's kind of how a corporation works. Or Chloe opens up her business and she, there's rats in the kitchen. She hires people on drugs to be waiters and waitresses. It's dirty. The staff is mean, and nobody shows up. What happens to my $2 million? It's gone. Okay, it's gone. It's evaporated because it was a bad investment. That's what joint stock companies are too. People invest their money in hopes of what? Getting more money. All right? So, the Virginia Company of London and the place where they go settle, where do they go settle? Jamestown, is unique from other places in America that get settled. They did not go for religious freedom. They didn't go for that. They went for one purpose and one purpose only, which is, I just told you, to make money. That is why the Virginia Company of London settled at Jamestown. So they do so in 1606. The Virginia Company of London gets a charter from King James I. You ever heard of him? King James? No. Okay, a couple people have. They get a charter from King James I. Basically, what this charter says is, hey, you can go and not be in England and have the rights of an Englishman. We'll have all the laws and rules that we have in England, even though you're not in England. You can go in the name of England. That's what the charter does. And so they hired a bunch of people to go and try to do the work and put a lot of pressure on them to do what? What do they put pressure on them to do? Strike it rich and strike it rich quick. Well, what did they find when they got to Jamestown? Streams of gold flowing into the ocean. Have you guys seen any streams around here of gold flowing in the ocean? No, me neither. They didn't find any either. So they did not strike it rich quick. In fact, they had a very tough go of it. So they set sail in 1606, late in 1606, and then 3 ships landed on the Chesapeake Bay. The Chesapeake Bay. They landed along the banks of the James River. As you can see, you got the Atlantic Ocean to the far east, which goes into the bay, and then the James River flows into the bay. The James River is not really that far from here, guys. You ever heard of Covington, Virginia? James River is right there. It's like a 45-minute drive. You can go to the James River, all right? So that's where they got off their boats, and the site that they chose was bad. It was bad. It was mosquito infested. It was a swamp. It was unhealthy. But they chose it because it was easy to defend. Defend from who? The people that were already living there. That's why they chose it. So on May 24th, 1607, about 100 English settlers, all of them men, no women on the first voyage, got off the boats and set foot on land, and they called that land Jamestown, named it after King James I. The early years of Jamestown were not very encouraging, especially to the investors. Many colonists died on the voyage there. Many expeditions were just shipwrecked, then never made it across the ocean. And then, by some chance, they did make it to shore. Colonists died of disease, malnutrition, and starvation. In many cases, there are actual written accounts of people surviving through the winter by eating dogs, rats, mice, cats. There is one account of a man whose wife died at the beginning of winter, and he was starving to death, and he dug her out of the ground and ate her because he was also starving to death. Who's ready to sign up to go to Jamestown? Nobody? Imagine how bad things were in England to want to go there. So, why didn't they, why didn't they prepare? Why didn't they prepare for winter? Why are people starving to death? It's not a secret. Like, why are they starving? Why were they so unprepared? Why are they going there in the first place? To get rich quick for the investors. Are they going there to establish a permanent colony and to engage in commerce with the local people? What are they there for? Get rich quick. You get rich quick farming, planting crops, making friends with the locals. Is this how you get rich quick? No. And so therefore they're very unprepared for when winter arrives. So eventually though, they realize this way of living, this culture they're establishing is not going to work. And so a person gets put in charge. He's very resourceful and young. And in 1608 he takes over, and his name was Captain John Smith. Captain John Smith. And he whipped the gold-hungry colonists into line with pretty strict, harsh rule. He was almost like a miniature dictator for Jamestown. And basically, what was his main rule? If you do not work, you do not eat. He made agriculture and hard work part of living in Jamestown, part of their culture. He even engaged in peaceful relations with the Native American people who were there. Does anybody know the tribe of Indians that were at Jamestown, what they were called? They were actually named after their chief. Powhatan. Powhatan. Very good. Powhatan Indians. And their chief's name was Powhatan. The Powhatan didn't really know what to think of these white people that had arrived and were starving to death and digging up their relatives and eating them. Were the Powhatans doing that? Were the Powhatans starving to death? No. And there were only 100 of them, and they were dying off like crazy. The settlers. Could the Powhatan have said, okay, my warriors, you guys go to this place where all these white folks are and just kill them? Could he have done that? He could have easily done that. And the settlers of Jamestown wouldn't have been able to stop them. They were weak from starvation, disease, massively outnumbered, thousands of Powhatan versus a few dozen settlers. Why doesn't he? He knows what they want. Like, they're arriving, they're looking around, they're trying to take everything that they can. That's what the settlers are doing. He knows what they're doing. Why doesn't he just wipe them out? They have things that he likes. What are some of the things that the settlers have that Powhatan and the Powhatan Indians like? weapons like guns, steel, horses. These are things the Powhatan Indians covet. They want those things. Now, he could easily just wipe them out and destroy them and just take those things. But he wants to establish a way to get more. I mean, if he kills them all, they're not going to bring any more. So, what he does is he comes up with a plan. He wants to try to create a relationship between the Powhatan Indians and the settlers. And so, he kidnaps John Smith and tries to scare him. Puts his head on a stump and pretends they're getting ready to chop his head off to scare him. And then Powhatan's daughter is playing along with it. At the very moment when the club's getting ready to come down on his head, she runs over and puts herself on top of him and says, "No, no, Dad, save him, save him." And who was that girl? Pocahontas. And she saves John Smith. And I'm saying saved in quotation marks. They were never going to cut his head off or beat him with a club. It was all an act. However, the symbolism of the ritual was intended to show John Smith that Powhatan was very powerful and that he could be reasoned with. That was the entire purpose. So Pocahontas became an intermediary between the Powhatan Indians and the settlers at Jamestown. In fact, Pocahontas ends up marrying one of the settlers at Jamestown and going back to Europe with them. Go figure, she dies of disease. So, diseased and despairing, the colonists dragged themselves back and forth across the ocean. With the sick people leaving, healthier people arriving, and then it's just first several years, just a revolving door of sick people coming and going to Jamestown from Europe. Until a new person arrives. Oh, here's Pocahontas with the saving John Smith. And then there's a rendition of Chief Powhatan. Eventually, on one of the ships that is arriving to Jamestown, a man by the name of Lord Delaware. This is not where the name Delaware comes from, the state. It's not the state of Delaware. His name is Lord Delaware. Unlike John Smith, he imposed harsh military regime on the colonists at Jamestown. He instills a harsh military discipline. Well, if you're going to use harsh military discipline, that's going to require military. And when it came to other people, notably the Powhatan Indians, interfering with his settlement at Jamestown, he will not tolerate that. And so Lord Delaware basically begins a declaration of war against the Powhatan Indians soon after he arrives. This war, which he instigated and began, included raiding Indian villages, burning houses, confiscating their provisions, torching Indian cornfields, thus beginning what is known as the First Anglo-Powhatan War. Which ended in 1614 with a peace treaty. It wasn't written down or anything. Do you know what the peace treaty that ended the Anglo-Powhatan War consisted of? The marriage of Pocahontas to John Rolfe, the first interracial union in America. I haven't seen the Disney movie Pocahontas. Who does she marry in that?
John Smith.
She does not marry John Smith. She marries John Rolfe. Not the same human. John Rolfe is the father of tobacco. John Smith was the guy who tried to whip, if you don't work, you don't eat. Okay? So after the marriage of Pocahontas and John Rolfe, a very fragile peace followed. And it lasted about 8 years. But the Powhatan Indians were being ravaged by European diseases. And they were upset about it, thinking that the Europeans were doing it on purpose. And so they strike back. So, in 1622, a series of Indian attacks left 347 settlers dead, including John Rolfe. And so in response to this, the Virginia Company of London calls for a state of perpetual war against the Powhatan Indians. And this state of perpetual war essentially continued without end until eventually what happens? The Powhatan Indians are extinct, not defeated, extinct. They no longer exist. Every man, woman, and child died by 1685. No longer on the world. Their culture, their language, their traditions, gone forever. Less than 100 years, the Powhatan went from, I can go and crush these people with just an order, to extinct. It had been the Powhatan people's tragic misfortune because they fell victim to the 3 Ds. Disease, disorganization, and disposability. You guys ever even seen one of these? It's a disposable camera. Yeah. They are a thing of the past. You guys don't know the thrill of getting your film developed, not knowing which pictures are good and bad. The native people were extremely susceptible to European imported diseases. Almost every disease was epidemic. The worst disease that they contracted? Smallpox. Measles were also epidemic as well, and a big killer. So disease. How is disorganization going to lead the Powhatan to extinction? They lacked unity. They could not effectively oppose the relatively well-organized military discipline of the settlers at Jamestown. Because the Powhatans, there were several tribes within the Powhatan Confederacy. None of them really got along, because before the white people arrived, guess what they were doing amongst themselves? Fighting. They didn't get along. And so they were not able to organize themselves in a full resistance against the settlers. How are they disposable? The Powhatans served no economic function to the Virginia colonists. They provided no reliable labor source. Why not? Why couldn't they provide a reliable labor source? Yeah, because you go up to them, you stand next to them, you tell them what you want them to do, and you give them a high five, and then they're dead of smallpox tomorrow. Because they couldn't be around white people. They had no resistance to European diseases. In addition, what did the Indians have that the Europeans wanted? What commodities? What kind of trade could they do? Nothing. Nothing. The really only commodity that the Indians had, the Europeans wanted, was their land. Well, they can just take it. All you got to do is go give them a high five. So they were disposable. They were disposable. All right? And this is a theme that doesn't just apply to the Powhatan Indians. It applies to all Native Americans in the New World in the 1600s. Okay? Questions on that? All right. I want to talk to you more about John Rolfe, Pocahontas' hubby. He became the father of the tobacco industry and really the economic savior of the Virginia Company of London. Because, we've been talking about how much trouble this Virginia Company's been having. They've been really struggling. There's not been much profit happening. Until John Rolfe comes along. And by 1616, he had perfected methods of raising and curing the pungent weed of tobacco. In doing so, he eliminates its bitter taste. And it works out really well for the settlers at Jamestown because there's something unique about tobacco that most other products don't have. What is it? It is addictive. Like, I like chocolate, but if one of you say, hey, Mr. William, a piece of chocolate, and I hadn't had a piece of chocolate in a while, I can still be like, nah, I'm good. Tobacco, on the other hand, it affects your brain. It is a drug. It contains nicotine, which is highly addictive. And so, what does this do for the demand of tobacco in Europe? It becomes nearly insatiable. They could not grow enough to meet the demand because of it's highly addictive. So, a tobacco rush swept Virginia as colonists who had once hungered for food now hungered for land to plant corn and crops so they could feed themselves. What are they going to plant? Tobacco. Almost every square inch of land that the Virginia colonists had was planted with tobacco, not food. So Virginia's prosperity was built on tobacco smoke, which is good in the short term, but it's also bad. What are some downfalls? What are some negatives about getting rich growing tons of tobacco? Anybody? Take a guess. Obviously, it's bad for your health and the health of people of Europe or anybody that uses it. How about the land? It's terrible for the land. Tobacco is a weed. You want weeds to grow in your garden and in your soil? No, because it sucks the nutrients all out of the land. And when you plant tobacco in successive years on the same piece of property, eventually what happens to that property? It becomes barren. It will take at least a year with lots of fertilizer and nutrients and manure to get it back to where you can grow anything on it again. Well, it took a few years for them to figure that out, but what happened when they did? All the land was ruined. So it became ruinous to the soil. Also, tobacco promotes the broad-acred plantation system. What is a plantation? What is a plantation? Okay, slaves typically do work on a plantation. Do they grow a lot of different crops on a plantation? Just one. Plantations only grow one. Like it'll be a tobacco plantation or a cotton plantation or a rice plantation, whatever. Typically, plantations only grow one. Um, it requires a lot of labor. It does require a lot of labor. And in 1619, a Dutch ship appeared off the coast of Jamestown with some 20 black African slaves. And they were really the only slaves in Jamestown for quite some time. Once they had purchased them, they realized it's way too expensive for them. And so by 1650, there were only 300 black slaves in North America. Not very many. The majority of black slaves were sent where in the early 1600s? Where? Yeah, in the Sugar Islands, in the Caribbean, Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, places like that. So, but labor was still necessary. Labor was still needed. Where are they going to get the labor from? Are there still people in Europe willing to come to the New World? Because they're poor, because they don't have any inheritance? Lots of reasons. Yeah. And so they began this thing called the headright system, or indentured servitude, indentured servants. And I'll talk more about that in a minute, if I have time. Okay? So, the London Company gave permission to the settlers at Jamestown to be able to have an assembly. And it's like a miniature parliament. And this miniature parliament is called the House of Burgesses. And it is really an early form of primitive democracy for the settlers at Jamestown. If you are the King of England, James I, how do you feel about the House of Burgesses? Because kings like to have their authority, second guessed and doubted, right? No. He detested and distrusted the House of Burgesses. And he also, James I, did not like tobacco. He didn't like the idea of tobacco. So in 1624, James I revokes the charters of the Virginia Company of London. And so now, Jamestown is no longer a private company. It is now a property of the King of England. And so now it is a colony. It's a colony. Virginia becomes a royal colony belonging to the King of England. The first of many such colonies to come. In fact, there are how many more to come? 12. 13 total. The 13 original colonies. So that's Virginia. Tomorrow we'll discuss another colony on the Chesapeake. Any guesses on what it is? Maryland, or as they called it, Maryland. All right, well, that's all I got for today.